Okay, is this everyone, Mackenzie? Okay. Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second of our online institute sessions. For those of you that haven't met me before, I'm Kash Haroon. I'm a volunteer with AKSI in the UK, and I'm delighted to present to you today one of our expert speakers on the topic of mental fitness and resilience. So if you remember from last time when we had our friend and colleague Dan Roselli on the first session, we were talking about being principled. So today's session builds on that knowledge, which is actually, okay, it's good being principled and it's great to have values and morals and, be the lighthouse as Dan described it. But it's equally important to actually be able to look after your own mind, look after your fitness in terms of your health, your well-being, and actually your resilience. So Matt is somebody that I work with. Fortunately or unfortunately, depends what you think from his perspective. On a regular basis, we're supporting leaders from different organisations across the Northwest and wider on this very topic, actually. And when we first went into lockdown, Matt and I got our heads together and we came up with some resources, including like a colouring in book, and short exercises, and also it's important to say Matt's got an app that he uses, which I'll let him talk about in the session itself. So very, very happy that Matt is here to talk to you about the session and what he's got to share. So without further ado, I will hand over to Matt. Matt, it's all yours.
Cool. Thanks very much, Cash, and great to I would say see everyone, but you've all got your cameras off.
Yeah, turn your cameras on, folks. We don't when we're doing these things, we turn our cameras on because we need audience reaction, don't we? We don't want to be just looking at black screens. This is
Yeah.
not.
Although
It's
I
not a
am
lecture.
in your defence, I am going to share some slides, and then it's harder for me to see people.
There you
Anyway,
go. You can see
great
me
to
through though.
I can see some more people now, so it's
There you
really
go.
good.
You can wave if you like.
Don't force them to wave. There you go. Yeah, sweet. So so great to see you all on the session today. So yeah, Cash invited me to run this session. Where to start? So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background and all the rest of it. But the session that I'm going to run is broadly in the area of mental fitness and resilience. And basically, I could talk for literally days on this subject. I could talk about from all different takes on it. I could talk about how you deal with pressure. I could talk about how you build up your personal resources and energy. I could talk about what organizations I think need to do to have a more proactive approach in this area, so you can look at it at all different levels. But I've gone for a bit of a mix, and there's usually a couple of ways that you can deliver this sort of content. I can either kind of work through a couple of ideas in real methodical detail and go through them quite slowly, or I can use what's called the shotgun approach and basically fire as much at you as I possibly can think of or you're interested in the time available, and hope that something sticks. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to use the latter approach, if that's all right. Only because there may be some things in there that you think, you know what? Maybe I already do that already. Maybe I can't see that working for me. Maybe that's something completely separate. But hopefully, there's something in there that kind of catches your attention, piques your interest, and I will, if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about habits. I'm a big believer in the power of habits to get a lot of this stuff to stick. And it's one thing kind of knowing some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But when you're watching a session like this, I don't expect you all to, have some sort of life-changing epiphany as a result of watching a session, or go away and do 100 things and become the most resilient person in the whole world overnight. But instead, I think it's, even if there's my expectations are low, even if there's one or two things that you think that's quite interesting, that's quite useful, that's something I could form a habit around, I'd be absolutely delighted by that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some slides with you. Bearing in mind, I do want to keep the session as interactive as I possibly can. So I will try and stop myself talking because I've got a real habit of just yapping on. So please feel free to interject at any point. Obviously, as usual with these sessions, we've got the chat functionality. So feel free at any point, if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat and I'll be able to see that. Or to be perfectly honest, if you want to unmute yourself and interrupt me, again, that's fine as well. Plus, I will be pausing at various points during the session to get some discussion going. And I've even got a couple of activities and breakout rooms as well to throw at you as well. So we'll try and keep it we'll try and keep it interactive. But it is a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of mental fitness and resilience. What does that mean, and how do you build it, individuals and businesses alike? So I didn't introduce myself properly. My name's Matt. I probably said that. I am a business psychologist. I have worked as a business psychologist for, that's weird. I don't know why it's coming up on the left-hand side. I have worked as a business psychologist for 12 years now. Job that's given me the opportunity to work with loads of different types of organisations. So I worked a load in the public sector, kind of NHS trusts, police forces, councils in the UK. I've worked with private sector organisations, engineering firms, banks, pharmaceuticals in the UK and abroad, all over really. And this is really corny at the start of a session like this, but the one thing that connects those companies, regardless of where they are or what they do, are people. And my firm belief that if people are healthy and happy, have a level of resilience and well-being, which again I'll talk about, it's great for you in terms of how you think and feel, but it's also good for performance, and it drives sustainable performance as well. Just really quickly, some of the stuff. I own a business called Sisu Psychology. We use digital products. I'll talk about my mobile app during the session. I could give you access to it as well following the session. But we use some digital products. We use some heart rate variability monitors to give people insight into their levels of well-being. We use some online platforms, all that sort of thing. I love data. That might come up during the session. It's quite difficult to measure some of this stuff. Sometimes it's quite intangible, but I do feel like as much as we possibly can, we should be trying to do this stuff in an evidence-based, informed way that's grounded in data. And behavior change is ideally at the heart of everything that I do. I like to think I make even a small difference to people's behaviors. That's our aim. Right then, so I'm going to dive straight in to talk about resilience and well-being and the current context and all that sort of thing. I will pause in a little bit, and let's have some. And I have some breakout rooms where I'm going to get some of your thoughts. But just as a bit of an intro, I thought I'd kick off with an analogy or a metaphor, if you don't mind. Sorry, I'm just going to... Which is something which is known as kintsugi. So I have probably just butchered the pronunciation of that. But kintsugi, for those who've not come across it, stands for golden joinery. And it's a Japanese art form whereby if a pot or a bowl or something like that is broken, what they'll do is they'll put it back together, and when they're putting this item back together, rather than putting it back together exactly as it was before, they will actually fix the cracks with golden lacquer, which is what you can see a picture of there. And what's that got to do with resilience? So what that has to do with resilience is I think the philosophy of that is quite interesting given everything that we're faced with at the moment. So, with the COVID crisis and everything, and sorry for the cliche, but the unprecedented challenges that we're facing, it can feel like our lives have been dropped on the floor and they've scattered into 100 pieces. And we are currently in the process of putting them back together again. And we've got a choice. We can either try and put it back together exactly as it was before and forget this ever happened, and you may want to do that. Or we could say, what have we learned during this period? Was there anything that we want to take with me? And the philosophy of kintsugi is all about celebrating the cracks as part of the history of that item, if that makes sense. So whilst there are a huge amount of challenges and uncertainty and all that side of things going on at the moment, there's also an opportunity. I think it's pressed the pause button for people, and it's saying, right, what do we want to take forward? When this kicked off, the pandemic kicked off, the first thing I did, because I'm an absolute geek and because I love psychology, is I went straight into the research and I said, can we learn something about this pandemic and its potential psychological impact on people from previous examples of this? And the short answer was it was difficult. We've never seen something of this scope, of this scale, since like the early 1900s and Spanish flu and all that sort of thing. But in recent times, what we're living through now is pretty unprecedented. But there are some things that we can learn from, for example, from like the SARS outbreak in Hong Kong in 2003. And one thing we found from that is that it had an emotional impact on people. So sure, it had an impact on people's lives, and deaths would come into that. But in addition, it has a psychological impact. So as you won't be surprised to know, the data, and this isn't the Hong Kong data, this is today's data, but the Hong Kong data showed that people's levels of happiness, life satisfaction, levels of purpose, they dropped in response to that pandemic. Levels of anxiety really spiked at that time. But one of the really interesting things that they found from the data was that people were generally naturally resilient in that their levels of happiness, purpose, life satisfaction, anxiety over time began to revert back to where they were before. Now, that's not a perfect science, and that's not saying it all happened on its own, but it's all based around this idea of what's called subjective well-being homeostasis, that we've got like a set point for our well-being. So maybe you're generally a 6 out of 10, or maybe you're a bit happier than that. You're generally an 8 out of 10. And whilst on a day-to-day basis, your mood, your feelings, your emotions, they go up and down, they generally revert back to this set point. And that's even true of like a macro level event like we're seeing at the moment. And just to kind of show you what's going on at the moment, this data that you're seeing here, this graph, is data from the Office of National Statistics, the ONS. They collect wellbeing data across the UK. And we're seeing a similar thing. So we're seeing that people's levels of happiness, purpose, life satisfaction, you can see at the start of March, really took a dip. Anxiety spiked hugely, but those levels are starting to level off again. So there's a couple of things I would say there. I'm going to go on and talk about resilience and about stress. And if you found yourself kind of struggling or having an emotional reaction to everything that's gone on, or just generally, first and foremost, that means you're a human being, okay? You're a human being. We all have an emotional response to these sorts of things. But the second thing is, there is some hope in the sense that, we people are naturally resilient. You just think about how you're dealing with things or how you've adapted compared to even a couple of months ago. And, we're resilient, we're an adaptable bunch, but there are things that we can do to help it along the way. So I just wanted to start with that as a bit of context and a bit of kind of, why does this stuff matter? I want to show you one more thing, which is around stress and the impact of stress, and then I'm going to get you talking about it, okay? Bearing in mind, throughout the session, as I said before, this isn't your life-changing epiphany. This isn't, one thing that will solve everything overnight, but it's small incremental changes that can make a real difference. So I just wanted to introduce you to this, and then I'm going to get you to have a conversation about it. So this is the physiological response to stress, okay? And it's based on something, or it involves something called the HPA Axis. So the H in the HPA Axis stands for hypothalamus. That is like the control center in your brain. You go into any situation and your hypothalamus says, can I deal with this? Can I deal with the challenge or the pressure that this situation entails? And it will come up with one or two answers. Either maybe not, in which case it will switch on one system, which is called the sympathetic system. It's like the accelerator pedal. It passes a signal onto your pituitary gland, which then passes onto your adrenal gland, which releases adrenaline into your body. Now, that is incredibly useful. When you're faced with a challenging situation, the ability to have a boost of energy in that moment is great. It's an evolutionary trait that we have. The risk, however, is if that accelerator pedal gets left on. If we feel like we're constantly feeling like we're responding to things, like we're constantly getting that flood of adrenaline, and that can become cortisol over time, which can damage our health. Or if your threshold for stress comes down, so things which you previously would have dealt with quite easily are suddenly becoming a really big problem. We'll look at that. And then the second system that can come on is if you go into the situation and your hypothalamus, rather than saying, maybe I can't deal with this, it says, yeah, do you know what? I can deal with this. I do have the resources to overcome this demand. In which case it switches on your parasympathetic system. And that is, to use the same analogy, it's like the brake pedal. It puts you into rest and digest. It recharges your batteries. Generally a really positive thing. The only risk there is if you spend too long in that zone as well, because there is a risk that can become lethargy or exhaustion or disconnection over time. So in summary, what we're trying to do is, generally speaking, like I said before, the body's natural response to any challenge is we might get stressed out, we might be chilled out, we might be somewhere in the middle. And that all those responses are totally natural. I'll talk about emotions actually as we go on and how that's our natural state. But generally speaking, we're trying to keep ourselves somewhere in that normal range. But what happens is, as a result of something happening, so for example, a global pandemic or anything for that matter, we can start to bounce around a little bit. So our responses can be, the accelerator pedal can get left on or it can get left off. The risk if it gets stuck on is you can get a general feeling of anxiety, panic, restlessness, finding it difficult to sleep, losing your temper more easily. And the risk of the brake pedal getting stuck on, or the whole system getting stuck off, is it can become that, like I talked about before, lethargy, exhaustion, fatigue. You're finding it difficult to find purpose in things. Maybe you sleep for a lot of the day, but then, or a lot of the night, even, long hours, but you still wake up tired. That might be a sign that that's creeping in as well. So the overall thing that we're talking about here is something called allostatic load. And sorry to throw another long set of words at you, but allostatic load is like the body's wear and tear. It's saying we've got natural responses to these things, but if we're spending too long stuck on or stuck off, it can start to take a toll on us, both physically, psychologically, and all the rest of it. So the first thing I wanted to do, before I dive into some of the things you can do about this to try and keep yourself in the normal range, is I wanted to ask Mackenzie if we could open up some breakout rooms. And we won't spend too long on this, just 5 or 6 minutes, but I am a huge advocate of the idea that we should be checking in with ourselves and checking in with other people regularly and just thinking about and talking about where am I at? Where am I at the moment, whether that's psychologically or physically. So you might want to talk about some of the things I've just mentioned there, whether it's the response to COVID, whether it's just your general life pressures, allostatic load, whether you think you're stuck on or stuck off, or what's caused some of that. I don't mind where you want to start. And you don't need to share any of this necessarily with the larger group if you don't want to. We're not recording the breakout sessions, so you can speak openly and honestly in those sessions. But I'd really love you to just have a chat, 5 or 6 minutes with, should we say a few people? So if you could put them into threes, maybe. Just have a chat with a couple of other people about where you're at and whether you recognize some of this around allostatic load and accelerator pedal and brake pedal and all that side of things. Is that okay, Mackenzie?
All right, I'll go ahead and create the rooms, and everybody will just need to click join to join the room, and we'll bring you back in about 8 minutes.
Cool. Thanks very much. Right, welcome back. Feel better? Or worse? Who knows? So I tell you what, because I want to give you a chance to chat about some other stuff as well. I'm not going to debrief that in the whole group, because as well, some of that might be quite personal to you in terms of where you're at and all the rest of it. But needless to say, like I said before, the core messages there are it's totally natural to have an emotional response to all sorts of pressures that are going on, COVID included. But it's really important that we talk about it, and it's really important that we don't bottle up those emotions. Again, if I've got time, I'll talk about. I won't turn this into a therapy session, but there are some therapeutic techniques that I'll talk about that are all about this idea of not bottling up emotions, but instead tapping into them and making them work for us. But again, I'll get onto that as we go through. What I did want to do was start to introduce this idea of resilience. So if we kind of know where we're at, we've got a feel for your emotional state and that side of things. What can you do to build resilience? Well, where does resilience come from? What is it? And how can you go about building it? So I'm going to start. I'm not going to do all the work for you. I'm going to start with a question, if you don't mind. So on the chat panel is probably the easiest to do it, on the chat box. Real open, broad question for you. In the context of all the things that I've been talking about there, what do you think resilience means? So what kind of things come to mind when you think about resilience? Positive or negative, totally up to you. If you know a resilient person, either yourself or someone that you know, what sort of attributes do you think that they have that make them resilient? And then we'll see how close that is to the definition that I'll show you. So get your thoughts in the chat box for me. Like I say, not necessarily no right or wrong answers here. Just let me know. Okay, cool. Thanks. So we've got keep calm and carry on. Yeah, absolutely. Calmness. That's made me smile, that one, JF. I'm really interested in how language, and I don't have any evidence for this, by the way, but I'm really interested in how language within certain countries influences their approach to pressure. So like my business is called Sisu Psychology, and Sisu is a Finnish word for like you get to the end of a challenge and then you can push yourself further. Whereas in Britain it's keep calm and carry on. And I'm always interested to see whether those things are useful or not. Like I say, I need to collect some more data around it. Yeah, keep them coming. So we've got withstanding pressure, recovery, returning to a challenge after, that's very extreme, by being beaten down by it. Yeah. Bouncing back, absolutely. If you've ever come across the phrase bounce back ability, coined by the comedian, the character, Alan Partridge, he talks a lot about bounce back ability, this inevitability that we're going to face some setbacks in life, but how are we responding to that? Interesting, Anushka says physically and mentally fit. Yeah, that's a really good one. So it's holistic as well. Ability to cover, balance. I love that one from Boris. Stability and focus. Not becoming resentful. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So good list in terms of what you'd associate with resilience. They're all completely wrong, but it's a good list. No, I'm only messing. I'm not messing. The good list and spot on. I'm actually really pleased to see this list that you've come up with because you've not fallen into some of the traps that we see around it, and no one has mentioned mentioned the dreaded word that people mention around resilience, which is coping. Okay, so I'll talk about how I see resilience and how I think it's subtly different from coping in just a sec. So we've got our kind of textbook definition of resilience here, which is a little bit wordy, if I'm honest. The modifiable capacity to utilize resources and skills to flexibly adapt to challenges or advantages, enabling thriving. What the heck does that mean? So this is when we're talking about mental fitness. And the easiest way to describe this is using the balance that you're seeing on the other side. Our life is a constant balancing act between, on one side, our perceived resources. So what can I draw upon physically, psychologically, socially, spiritually to help me get through or to deal with, on the other side of the balance, my demands or my challenges or my pressures. Now, generally speaking, if your resources outweigh your demands, you're in a pretty good place. You're able to deal with the things that life is throwing at you. The problem comes is when the balance tips the other way. So when your resources are depleted in any of those areas I've mentioned, or your demands increase, or they increase acutely, or they build up over time. And this is what leads to stress. And as a result of stress, what most people do, quite rightly in many ways, is they cope with that. They put a coping mechanism into place. Now, the only problem with coping, and where I say it differs from resilience, is twofold. So number one, it's very reactive rather than proactive coping. But the other thing with coping is, and I'll ask you about this, whilst it can be a positive thing, it can also be quite a negative thing as well. So really quickly on the chat panel, there are no wrong answers here. Let me know some negative coping strategies that you might use, or not you personally, someone might use if you're stressed out. Anything at all. What's some examples of some negative coping strategies? Yeah, that was quick, Michael. Thanks for that. Drinking. Anything specific? Georgia, drinking as well? Anything specific, or just all the drinks? Yeah. Yeah, so we've got another couple coming in. So we've got drinking, we've got gambling, smoking. Yeah, that's a good one from Georgia. Repression, or link to, Alexandra said there as well, isolation. Absolutely. So sorry, I'm just laughing at kebabs. Thanks, Cash. So isolation, or withdrawal, or repression, or denial. Stick your head in the sand. There's a thing in behavioral psychology known as the ostrich effect. You know ostriches. They're well known, although apparently this is a myth, which I was devastated to hear, that when they're faced with danger, they stick their head in the sand because they want to avoid it. And human beings, we do that. If something negative comes up, there is sometimes we just deny it's going on. There's one more that people do in addition to your vices and your excess and your withdrawal. There's one more really common type of coping that people do. Yeah, so we've got the denial. It's kind of the opposite of denial or withdrawal. Any ideas? Yeah, the going quiet, that's kind of on the lines of the bottling it up or withdrawal. I'm thinking of the opposite of that. What do you reckon? Any takers? Yeah, Anushka, tackle the challenge. Yeah. So the thing I'm thinking of is acceptance isn't too bad, actually. Yeah, so Hannah's kind of there. So fighting it, blame the world, perhaps. The thing I'm thinking of is work harder, okay? Work harder, work longer hours, put your bulletproof vest on, toughen yourself up and get yourself through. And the reason why people are drawn towards that is because it allows them just in the moment to kind of survive. But the risk is that they're not necessarily thriving during that period. So the reason why people are drawn to all these coping mechanisms, okay, and why they're common around any of the ones you mentioned, drinking and smoking and chocolate and gambling included, is because they work, okay? So I'm here as a well-being professional to tell you, next time you are stressed out, if you get blind drunk and eat loads of chocolate, you will be less stressed out. It works. However, please don't go and get drunk after the session today and say I told you to. It is obviously not a long-term coping strategy. It's not going to remove the stress, which is still there when you sober up, and it may be having a detrimental effect on your health. So instead, with resilience and mental fitness, what we're doing is we're moving upstream with this stuff. We're saying, what can we do proactively to build our resources, physically, psychologically, socially? What can we do to influence our demands? And finally, how do we look at our mindset as well? You put two different people under the same pressures and they will react entirely differently. So there's something about the filter we have on the world and way that we see and we process things that plays a role here. So in summary, really quickly, resilience is proactive rather than reactive, positive rather than always a negative thing, about adaptability rather than just digging in and resisting change, for example. And finally, it's meant to be a win-win for people and organizations. One of the main barriers or challenges that I come up, especially when I'm working with our organizations and businesses, is I get sent in to build resilience of people. And the risk is that is perceived as, right, so you're just going to toughen us up so the business can stress us out more. And I hate it if I am sent in for that reason. I hope I never am. But that's not how I see resilience. I see it as more positive and proactive than that. It's a beneficial for everyone. And the final thing I'd say on the definition of resilience, before we get onto some of the practical techniques, I've not got a slide for it, is the avoidance of toxic positivity. Okay, so toxic positivity is, like I said before, and I keep hammering home this point, and it's become a bit of a cliche, but that's good. It's become a real saying, it's okay to not be okay sometimes. And resilience isn't just about always putting a brave face on things and pretending everything's all right and telling everyone around you that they should be positive, because sometimes it's shit and sometimes it's not positive. And that is what it is. And then it's about saying, but what can I do to respond to this? And that's where resilience comes in. So we've defined resilience. We've talked about where you're at. So that gets us on to all the myriad things that you can do to build personal resilience and mental fitness. And basically, as this slide shows, there are a ton of things. There are loads of things. And this is where I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about all these different techniques. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'll give you an insight into a couple of them, which I think are particularly interesting or you may not have heard before. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you into some breakout rooms. And I'd love you to think about which ones of these really stand out for you as an individual. Okay. So the easiest way to do it is we break them down into different categories. So this is the resource side of things. So I'm not looking necessarily at the pressure, the demand side of things, although that is a whole topic on its own. How are you perceiving the pressure that you're faced with? This is on the resource side of that balance, okay? So physically, the obvious stuff, eating the right stuff, getting exercise, getting enough sleep goes a huge way as the foundation for resilience. It impacts us emotionally and mentally as well as physically. But in addition to that, there's some interesting stuff in here. So what's worth mentioning? Active recovery and wasting natural energy. That's interesting, or I think. So there's a whole load of science around things called circadian and ultradian rhythms, okay? So circadian rhythms, for example, are these natural oscillations, these natural up and downs that we experience throughout the day. Circadian rhythms maybe once, maybe twice in any given day. And the first thing here is that these natural peaks of energy will be at different times for different people. So you may get your morning person who's great in the morning versus your night owl who's better later on in the day. Me, for example, I kind of struggle to get going in the morning, fairly low energy. Whereas my wife, on the other hand, kind of bounds out of bed in the morning, full of energy, morning person, but then sees I'm still there and it all goes wrong after that. No, not yet. Anyway, I hope not. But we've all got these different peaks of energy. And the first thing is use your natural peak of energy. Okay, so I'll give you an example of this. If you are a morning person and you're at your best from 8 till 10 in the morning, and that's when your energy's highest and you can think creatively and take on challenges, do not waste that energy doing stuff that you could pretty much do in your sleep. Okay, so an example of that I see within lots of businesses is people when they first get to work or they open their laptop, they go straight to their emails. They go straight to their emails and they start trawling through emails that they could pretty much do in their sleep. That is a huge waste of energy, because that is a time when they could take on a real challenge, something that has the potential to set them back, and they would be much more effective at overcoming it. So it's trying to, and I'll talk about habits if I have the time, but it's trying to make more conscious decisions about how you use your energy through the day. And in addition to that, we also have things called ultradian rhythms, and these are the 90-minute peaks and troughs. And this means every 90 minutes trying to do something, anything to peak your energy up. That could be physically, it could be psychologically, it could be socially. So go for a walk, get outside, get some movement in your day, speak to someone. We derive energy from other people, or even just change channels psychologically. Think about something different, change your psychological state, but doing it regularly throughout the day. The way to spot if you are in one of these troughs, one of these ups or downs, if you're in one of these ups or downs, is your body will usually tell you. So if you're losing concentration, if you're feeling restless, if you start yawning, it's usually a sign that you're in one of these 90-minute troughs. And we can push through them, which is what a lot of people do. Or we can say, do you know what, that's my body telling me that I need to do something to peak that energy back up. So there's a whole load of stuff you could do with physical. What else is worth mentioning? Emotional. You couldn't have got through a session like this, could you, without me mentioning mindfulness? It's everywhere at the moment, which is good, I think. Hopefully everyone on the line has come across mindfulness by now. There are great apps around it, Headspace, Calm, there's YouTube videos, loads of great content. It's about staying in the present moment, okay? Keeping yourself in that present moment. The couple of things I'd say about mindfulness are, find a way that works for you, okay? You do not need to change into your yoga kit and sit in a darkened room for 2 hours to practice mindfulness meditation. You can do it for 60 seconds at a time. You can do mindful walking, mindful eating, build it into your day. And the other thing I'd say with mindfulness is, if you're going to give it a go, give it a chance. The reason I say that is because I come across a lot of people who say to me, oh, I tried mindfulness and it didn't work for me. What they really mean is, they did 15 minutes meditation and didn't attain some sort of Zen-like bliss, so therefore it doesn't work. That is like walking into a gym, doing 15 minutes on a treadmill and wanting to work out as a marathon runner. You need to work at it. So mindfulness can be really useful. I'm going to leave the therapeutic techniques, CBT and ACT. I'm hoping I'll have time to talk to you about them after the breakout groups, actually. So hold that thought around them. Hopefully you've come across some of the mental techniques. So avoidance of multitasking is a big one. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a quick exercise before we do that, because I forgot I had this. I'm going to give you a quick exercise around multitasking. Right then, so you need a pen and a piece of paper for this exercise. So I'll give you a couple of seconds. Grab a pen, piece of paper. I've kind of given away the game now in terms of whether multitasking is good or bad, but I'll do it anyway. So what I'm going to do is, when I ask you to, I'm going to get you to do this first exercise here, which is dead straightforward. You are going to write down 2 things for me. So as quickly as you possibly can, don't start just yet, but as quickly as you possibly can, you're going to write down the sentence, I could do many things at once. And then you're going to, underneath that, you're going to do all the numbers 1 to 22 as quickly as you possibly can, okay? I'm going to start the timer, and what I want you to do is write those things as quick as you can and look up, and as soon as you finish, look up and check what the timer says, and then post what time you got into the chat, please. So we're going to have a bit of a competition here, okay? So we'll see who can do this bit quickest. So you're just doing those 2 things, those 2 sentences, look up, check what the timer says, and then post your time into the chat. Everyone ready? Yeah? Cool. Right, so your time starts in 3, 2, 1, off you go. As soon as you finish, stick your time in the chat. Okay, I'm going to stop it at 30. If you're still struggling, you're not that great at this exercise. Cool, right, so we've got some coming through. So, Andrew Gibbs, 14 seconds. Wow, that is impressive. I don't think I've ever seen.
We know that.
I don't think I've ever seen a 14 seconds before. That's impressive. Or you cheated in some way. Who knows?
Yeah, you don't want to look at how bad my my script is.
Fair enough. So we got 14. We got
copy and paste, you know.
Yeah, it's doctor's handwriting that.
Yeah, we got Jeff with 15. We got a few on 17, 18, a few on 20. I think Boris bringing up the rear with 27, but still not too bad. Cool. Right. So, second part to the exercise, different one this time. Let me go back so I can reset my timer. So this time you're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to set the timer exactly the same as before, and you're actually going to do the same thing, the same sentences, but this time you're going to mix them together. Okay, so you're going to do I can do many things at once and the numbers 1 to 22, but you're doing the letter, then number, letter, then number, letter, then number. And you can't cheat. Don't do the letters and leave gaps and then put the numbers in. Anyone who's thinking of doing that, yeah. You've got to do them letter, number, letter, number, letter, number as quickly as you possibly can. Same as before. As soon as you finish, check the clock, see what you got, post it in the chat. Ready, go. Ooh, there's a few coming up through the chat. Pressure on the people who haven't finished yet. Okay. I'm going to stop it at 1 minute. If you got more than 1 minute, just put 1 minute in the chat. Right then, let's see what we've got. How did we get on? How did Mike get on? Was it Mike before who got 14 seconds? Who was the guy who got Andrew? Sorry, Andrew. How did you get on this time?
Yeah, no comment.
41. I've got you. 41. That's still pretty quick. Audrey, was your 28 for the first or the second? No.
So my first one was Andrew. So my first one I can't remember. I think it was 17, and then this one was 28. Yes.
Flipping heck. Right. Well, so you
can't you, Andre?
Yeah. So you, Andrew, seem to have disproved what I said. You seem to be better at multitasking than not.
Yeah.
But near enough.
He's in denial about how great he is. I'm just saying.
Andrew, you're lying, and everyone.
I'm not lying. I can tell you the truth.
I believe him. He's
I really
insane.
don't believe him.
I love it. Cool. So, but for most people, for everyone on the line, Andrew included, you were all slower at the second one than the first one. In addition to that, you might have felt the pressure more on the second one. It's a bit more difficult. The quality may have suffered. You make more mistakes. You mess up. You're getting a bit stressed out with the second one as opposed to the first one, which is pretty easy. This is a very long-winded, convoluted way of showing you that multitasking is multi-failing, okay? We spend a load of our lives, especially our working lives, or you think at uni or anything like that, constantly multitasking and switching our attention from one thing to the next. And I'm not naive enough to think that you won't, you can avoid that. There'll be some times when you have to work in that way. But we know from the research around this stuff that it is not the most effective way of achieving productivity and performance. And more than that, it drains our energy hugely. So if you spend a huge amount of time kind of multitasking, juggling 100 things all at once, switching your attention constantly through the day, the risk is that it will tire you out. And therefore, the risk when it comes to resilience is that when you're faced with something more challenging, that will really set you back and you won't be able to overcome it. Rather than if you've sequentially processed some of your tasks, I don't know if anyone's come across things like the Pomodoro Technique, really popular one, but 25 minutes at a time, 25 minutes, just focus on one task and then switch to another, and then another 25, switch to another. If you're sad enough like me, get yourself a little timer like this that does your 25 minutes, or set it on your phone, but sequentially processing tasks rather than constantly switching to one to the other is a great way to feed that mental energy. Final ones before I break you into breakout rooms. Ritually checking emails. I'd widen that really to the use of tech in general. Technology, I like to call it the Jurassic Park problem. Yeah, so technology can do amazing things. Sorry, that's that link's probably a little bit too old for some of the people on the line. But Jurassic Park, technology can do amazing things. But if it's not used in the correct way, it can also have a real dark side. It can cause us problems. So don't let technology run your day. Use the technology for your benefit. So whether that's checking in with emails or social media or whatever at specific times in the day and using that in a way that helps you rather than letting it run your day. Or just get rid of the stuff that's really affecting you negatively. I personally, at the start of lockdown, with everything that was going on, I found myself spending an inordinate amount of time on Twitter and stressing out about comments and this and that and Dominic Cummings and all the rest of it. And I just thought, I don't need this. So I deleted my Twitter account, got rid of it. And I've never looked back. Like, it's improved my mental health. And I might go back to it. At some point. But right now, you think about, you've got 4 buckets full of, emotional and mental and purposeful energy. I just didn't need that one draining my mental bucket, if that makes sense, at the moment. And then the final one's purpose, core values, living your core values. I'll talk a bit more about that actually after the breakouts around some of these therapy techniques. But putting your time and energy towards the things that really matter to you, knowing what your energy, where your values are, knowing where your strengths are, and playing to those is key. So tons and tons of stuff. I want to give you time to have a chat about these things here. So we're going to break you into rooms again. Again, just kind of 7 or 8 minutes. Have a chat with someone. You might want to reflect on some of these things. You can't take the slide with you into the breakout room, so take a quick snap of the slide that you are seeing now. Take a quick picture of that, and take it into your breakout rooms and have a chat with another couple of people. And just think about, are there any of these that you use with some success? Are there any that you would add to the list? Are there any that you haven't seen before that you'd like to know more about or you would like to use yourself? Just have a chat about, if you were going to start filling up those 4 buckets, where's the low-hanging fruit for you? And then I'll bring you back. I'll talk a bit about therapy, of course I will. And then habits, how to get some of this stuff to stick. Okay? So, Mackenzie, if you wouldn't mind putting people into the breakout rooms again, I'll see you in 7 or 8 minutes.
All right. So once again, go ahead and just join your room and we'll bring you back.
Okay. Cool. Right. I'm going to stop talking because, as you can tell, I love to talk, and give you a chance to kind of feedback anything that came out of the conversation, or ask any questions if you want to know about any more about some of that stuff. I am gonna talk a little bit more about, like I say, another couple of techniques in a bit more depth and habits if I've got the chance as well. But I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on some of the stuff that I've talked about so far. So what came up? Anyone at all? Silence.
They're shy. We have to pick on them.
Question though, if it's possible to ask, about in the techniques in your slide, you mentioned the Pomodoro Technique, which is something that I've heard a lot of people rave about. But I mean, I think I do have this problem of multitasking as well, which makes it hard. But also when there's a task that you have to do that takes longer than 25 minutes, I mean, I feel like you can do like those multiple 25-minute sessions, but people do say that it goes against the point. So what would you suggest for, longer tasks and something that goes over this 25-minute golden mark that a lot of people talk about? Yeah. So I kind of sit on the fence a bit with this. So you'll read some things that say that you should never go over 25 minutes, and that if you go 26 minutes, then something terrible is going to happen. Like, you know what I mean? And generally speaking, the premise behind it is because the idea behind it is because a lot of the research shows that we think that by just getting our heads down and keeping on working, if we work 2 hours, we will get more done than if we work 4 lots of 25, and that incorporates 20 minutes of a break, if you see what I mean. But the research seems to show that the opposite a lot of the time is true, that actually we get more done with the breaks. The one thing, there's a couple of caveats to that. So this is where the fence sitting comes on. So there is some ideas that sometimes you can get in the zone and like in the flow, and time can fly by. And
I wouldn't want you to kind of pull yourself out of that just to adhere to the 25 minutes, if that makes sense. But at the same time, and the other one that happens is yeah, like you say, when tasks take slightly longer than that. Although I stack them up, so I have a little, I won't be able to find it right now, but I have like a journal, and I'll say this thing might take 2 hours, so I'm going to do 4 25-minute blocks because that'll just about cover it. And I'll do 25, and then I'll go off and do something else for 5 minutes, literally like go outside, get some fresh air, walk, then come back and do the 25 again, 25, 5, 25. So you can stack them up with one another. But yeah, I'm a big advocate with some of this stuff, that it's find what works for you. And if you think you need slightly longer or on a task, then do that. The one challenge you would have to that is you tend to be more creative if you've taken the breaks. Okay, so you might find that you are able to, if you just do 2 hours solid block, you can get more done in terms of like pure content or pure like productivity, I guess you could call it. But the risk is that it's not particularly creative. You've not thought about it differently. If you're doing a very mundane task, a very dull and repetitive task, you'll get more done in 2 hours without breaks than if you took breaks. But the moment you want to do something that involves some creative thinking, or thinking outside the box, or thinking about the quality of what you're producing, the regular breaks are really useful. But it's building it in. It's building it in as well. I've got the timer and everything, but I'm not mad enough to do those all day, every day. I'll use them for I'll do an hour of it. I'll do 2 blocks together, and then I'll work, in longer blocks after that. I'll just use it in a way that works for me, but make a more conscious decision around it, I guess. Would be.
Have you heard of free play? I think it's called something like that, where you have a time slot that is unscheduled. So you've got almost you've given yourself 3 hours to do something in, and you use that time to work on something that is like a passion or something that is like a hobby. And what I've read is that you get into something called deep work time. So you almost, a bit like the exercise you gave us earlier, really complex thinking. It takes you a while to really immerse your brain in it. Yeah. So once you're in there, you stay in there, and it's really hard. It's like what you were describing earlier, but it takes a while to get there, and it depends on how complex the task is. If it's a really complex task, it can sometimes take you a while to get there. But then when you're there, and if you have a break, that's where your breakthroughs happen.
Yeah. I've come across it because I did some work with this, but with Facebook and Google, and they put this in, they schedule this in. They'll say like on a Thursday afternoon from 3 till 5, or 2 till 5. No one's doing their day job. You have to do something else. You got to do something that you just enjoy. And generally speaking, in those companies, they're like coding and making games and all that sort of thing. And then lo and behold, they'll come up with something amazing that they never would have got to if they were doing the things on their to-do list, if that makes sense. So yeah. Thanks. Any other thoughts?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
For you, because you might have a good answer to this. Do you ever find that you're on the verge of having a new discovery, and it's just on the tip of your tongue, and it's been there for a few weeks, and you can't you're halfway to conceptualizing it fully, but you can't get the full idea out yet? What would you do if you were someone in that position to make the idea come out fully, so you would know what you were thinking? Does it make sense? Does anyone get that? Like they've almost realized something after years and years of thinking about it, and they can't quite get it yet. Like it's not there. Should I just be patient, or should I do more work on it to maybe it would come out if I involve myself in it more?
I'll be honest. I don't have that. Maybe I do. But let me think about some things that might be linked to it. So one thing is that you can practice creativity. Okay, so there's a common misconception that creativity is something you're born with or you're not. But there is loads of research that says that's not true, that there are things that you can do. So, for example, practicing divergent rather than convergent thinking is key. So convergent thinking is what we generally do. We take loads of information that's available to us, and we bring it all down, and we narrow it down, and we say that's the answer. And in the workplace and at uni and all the rest of it, we have to do that constantly because we're under time pressure. So it's like bring me an answer quick. Like, I don't have time to be creative and think of all these things. Just bring me an answer. So we use convergent thinking, which is really useful. But divergent thinking, on the other hand, is you start them with a blank sheet of paper and you just brainstorming, for want of a better word. You're coming up with lots of different ideas, and you can exercise that type of thinking using things like the many use exercise. Yeah. So think about a house brick. Like, think of as many uses in 60 seconds as you can for a house brick. You might want to use it to build a house. You might want to use it as a flower holder. You might want to use it as a weapon. I don't know, whatever. Sorry, I've lost you there. But whatever. You think of as many as them as you possibly can. And what that's doing is there's some studies that show that it's exercising the part of your brain to think about things differently. Do you see what I mean? So then when you're faced with an actual task, you don't just go convergent. You don't just go, right, there's the thing, and I'm gonna start wide. The other thing I'd say is, echoing what Cash said there, trying to book some time into it. Action always, I think, helps. So just trying to do something, so for example, I do a lot of like writing and like YouTube videos and that sort of thing, and writing scripts for those sorts of things. And if I sit and I kind of just try and think of them, like think of ideas and let them cultivate in my brain, that only goes so far. The better thing to do is to just sit down and start writing. And I don't really know what I'm writing about, and I don't really know what I'm doing, but the more I do it, and the more words come out, the idea might be in there somewhere, and then I'll lead to one thing to another. But it's easier when I'm kind of just writing it down and starting the activity. Or I'll do a YouTube video and I'll just start talking, and like a load of it might end up on the cutting room floor. I did a YouTube video the other day. This is ridiculous, and I did 72 takes of something that I wouldn't recommend that, but I did 72 takes because I was just like, that's rubbish, and I don't really like what I was talking about there, and I'll move on to the next one. A load of the takes were just me messing up, but it was more like just start moving. Do you know what I mean? Just start moving and start getting some of those things down, because you might find that it tumbles out somewhere, rather than trying to just leave it there, because it might always stay there. But that's my best guess. I'm not an expert in terms of your specific need there. I'm not too sure, but yeah, there's a couple of things you might want to think about. Thanks, Georgia. Cool. I'm just conscious of time because I want to cover a couple more things, but are there any other just questions on that, like building resilience bit?
I have a question about the use of data, Matt. So you're mentioning you're using data, and data can come from different sources, and also data can change and evolve over time. And I think you mentioned at the beginning you've been doing this for 12 years. Yeah. Would you have given the same presentation to us 12 years ago as you would have today, notwithstanding your own, expertise and wisdom in the field as time has gone on, just considering the data and the information that you've passed along? Or would it have been significantly different? Or would things have been completely different as to how you would suggest to people to be resilient in the first place?
So I think personally, humans are pretty simple creatures in a way that, exercise is a good thing for your mental health and your physical health, and it was 1,000 years ago, and it is today. So there are aspects of what I deliver that won't have changed. Where I have adapted it, and this is, I've never really thought about. That's a very thought-provoking question. Where I have thought about it is reacting to the reality of where we're at the moment, and certainly everything that's going on at the moment. So specifically, a lot of the stuff that I'm working on at the moment is about how you build this into remote working teams. Because everyone's working from home, and how you react to the different environmental cues that you have because you're at home rather than at work, and how you create a conscious boundary, physical and psychological boundary between your home and your work. So those things may not have been as prominent even 6 months ago before the world ended. But in addition to that, I would say probably reacting to the fact that I feel like people's attention spans are getting shorter. So, trying to do short, sharp ways to build this into your everyday, and being a realist about that. Whereas I probably 12 years ago, I was quite naive to the fact that, people at work, they're busy, but they're not too busy. They can get out for an hour's walk at lunch, and, you say that to a group of people in a room and they're just like, what's an hour? Like, what's an hour for lunch? That doesn't exist. So I've probably become a little bit more of a realist about that. Whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, whether I should still be advocating, you know, you should go out for an hour because it's probably better than 10 minutes. But yeah, that's probably the main shift that's come in there. Thanks for asking that question and shattering my entire thought process around what I do. Thanks, Jeff.
Food for thought for later, man. You can sleep on it tonight. Do some parasympathetic breathing before you go to bed.
Absolutely. Why not? Cool. Right then. So, like I say, fast running out of time. We've got 15 minutes left. I just wanted to share just a couple more things around some of the techniques and also this idea of habits and how to get some of this to stick. So it's all very well kind of knowing, you know, what you should do and, you know, some of the good practice, but how do you actually make it happen? So really quickly, just to get you back onto the brain and all that, how that works, and move us on to therapeutic techniques, I'll give you a very whistle-stop tour of the neuroscience behind this stuff, okay? There are different parts of our brains that do different things very well. So for example, we have our brain stem, the bit at the bottom of our brain, which deals with survival instincts. They're automatic, they run on autopilot, and they're very, very useful. So you step in front of a bus by accident, that kicks in, puts you back on the pavement again. We need our survival instincts, very useful things. One step up from that are our limbic system, and that's where I'm really interested. That's where our emotions and our feelings live. And it drives a huge amount of our behavior, but we often don't have a conscious awareness of it, which is why you can sometimes feel something without necessarily being able to put that into words. And then finally, you got your cortex, and your cortex is like your thinking, your higher functioning. You know, it's the human part. You can weigh up pros and cons. You can think very rationally about something. They're all really positive. So we need our emotions, we need our survival instincts, we need our higher functioning. But it's the order in which they kick in that doesn't always help us out. So sometimes we go into a difficult situation, and we'd love to use the cortex and work it through and come up with a rational response, but instead, the limbic system jumps in, and there's a particular part of this called the amygdala that deals with our immediate emotional response to threat, essentially. And worst case scenario, you go into a situation, you'd love to use the cortex, but the limbic system takes over, you have a negative response, you react to that negatively, and worst case scenario, 24 hours later, you look back and think, do you know what? I could have dealt with that slightly differently, okay? There's something else that comes into this, which is something which is well known within behavioral economics, which is something called System 1 and System 2, or fast and slow thinking. There's a very famous book about fast and slow thinking called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a bit of a slog to read, but if you get a chance, it's a great book to read by a guy called Danny Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize for economics. But he talks about these two systems that exist in our brain. I'm going to give you an example of fast and slow thinking on the next slide, okay? This comes straight from the book, so if you've read it or come across this, so you may have seen this before, but if this is the first time you're seeing it, what I'd like you to do is, on the next slide, I'm going to show you a quick question. Same as before, we're going to have a bit of competition in this. I'd like you to read through the question, dead straightforward, but as quickly as you possibly can. In the chat box, I would like you to let me know what you think the answer is, okay? So it's dead straightforward, so just as quick as you can, let me know what the answer is, and we'll see who gets there first. So the question is that a bat and a ball cost £1.10 together. The bat cost £1 more than the ball, so how much does the ball cost? What do you reckon? Cool. So I got a mix coming in, that was quick. So we've got some 10p's, we've got some 5p's as well. Does anyone who said 5p want to let me know? Who was first? Andrew, Gibbs? Or Boris, you're quick as well. Do you want to let me know why you said 5p?
Because I've already heard the problem.
Could you cheat it? Yeah. Fair enough. No worries. So, yeah. So the correct answer is actually 5p. I'd be really impressed if there's many people on the line who've not seen this before, who immediately thought 5p. Because what the research shows is that the majority of people, when they first see this exercise, they reckon up to 90% of people, they think 10p. And the reason you do it is it's fast thinking at work. You see the £1.10, you see the pound, and you think, what's missing? 10p, of course it is. So your brain, it fills the gaps and it puts that 10p in there. And that's useful in a number of ways, you know. So when you're going into difficult situations, it's useful to be able to deal with things quickly, to have that fast thinking response. We couldn't run our whole lives on slow thinking. We'd never get anything done. But you can see here that actually the fast thinking led us astray this time around. So if you'd really thought about it, you'd have come to the conclusion that actually, if it was 10p, the back would be £1.10 and the total would be £1.20. And that would have been wrong. So this is an example of when you're going into a difficult situation, sometimes we rely on our automatic responses. And sometimes, like I said before, maybe 24 hours later, you look back and say, do you know what, if I could have slowed that process down, I might have thought about it slightly differently. And this is where some of these therapeutic techniques can come in, okay? So therapeutic techniques include things, so there's two main ones that I just wanted to talk to you about. The first one is called cognitive behavioral therapy. The second one is called acceptance and commitment therapy, okay? I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of these two things without turning it into a therapy session. So start with cognitive behavioral therapy. Based on the premise, and similar to acceptance and commitment therapy, based on the premise that you find yourself in a situation and the emotions don't come directly from the situation you find yourself in. Instead, thoughts drive feelings. I use a model around this, or an acronym around this, which, it's been recorded, isn't it? Which I use, which is STFU. Has anyone come across STFU before? Any chance? Yeah, I could see a couple of people, maybe. You've probably heard of STFU, no, that's not what it means. The reason I use STFU is because I'm hoping it's more hardwired in your brain, but the way I use it, because I'm weird, is situation, thoughts, feelings, and untangle, okay? So situation, what's the challenge that you face with? Nowhere near as catchy as the other one. But what's the situation you're faced with? What are the thoughts off the back of that? How does that make you feel? And then coming back and untangling those things. And what you're looking for is, you know, so I'll run sessions with groups of people and I'll get them to think about like an exercise. So for example, imagine you want to bake a cake and you head over to the supermarket to buy eggs and flour, and you walk down the baking aisle and the shelves are completely empty. There's no eggs, there's no flour, you can't get what you want. So you think, don't panic, there's a supermarket next door, I'll go there instead. So you head to the second supermarket, you walk down the second baking aisle, and there are no eggs and no flour. And what I'll get people to think as a result of that, I'll get them to think about themselves in that circumstance and say, right, what thoughts and feelings come off the back of that? Now, some people will say, I'm incredibly frustrated. I really wanted those eggs and flour. I really wanted to make that cake. They get angry because they're thinking someone's done me wrong here. You know, everyone else has taken the things that I needed and I'm frustrated and I'm angry about it. Other people, on the other hand, may say, oh, well, that's something that's out of my control. I'll buy a cake instead. I'll buy a case of beer instead of the cake and I'll drink that instead as a coping mechanism. You know, they'll think a more positive response. So based on the same situation, we can have different responses based on what we're thinking. And cognitive behavioral therapy is about catching that thought and challenging it for the evidence it's based on. How realistic is that thought? So everybody's stolen the eggs and flour on purpose. How realistic is that? Probably not that realistic. They're not out to get you, you know. So catch that thought and challenge it for the evidence it's based on. You may have fallen into other thinking traps, things like catastrophization. This is the end of the world. I wasn't able to make a cake this time, so I will never be able to get these ingredients ever again to make a cake in the future. Again, where's the evidence for that? And cognitive behavioral therapy is about getting those thoughts and feelings out of your head, either through journaling, so writing down, or through coaching and counseling, or, you know, speak to someone about these, and then looking for the evidence about it. Put them up on a dock in a courtroom and say, where's my evidence for or against that particular thing, and challenge it. Okay. And some people find that incredibly useful, that idea of, I'm going to get my thoughts out of my head and I'm going to challenge them for the evidence. I'm going to look for more positive alternatives. Okay. And the second thing that comes into this, if cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work for you, or those light touch techniques don't work for you, the other way that you can approach it is using acceptance and commitment therapy. So this is slightly different. So it's based on the same idea that thoughts exist in your head, but it's also based on this idea that we have scripts within our mind. Okay, we have beliefs, we have concepts that we link together. It's actually what separates us from animals. Okay, so animals are okay at linking concepts to one another. You know, they can say that dark shadow overhead might mean that it's dangerous and I need to run away. That bell may mean that there's some food coming and I'm going to get ready to eat. But human beings are much better at that. We can link all sorts of complex things. You know, so even children, you tell a child, you know, you show them 5 different types of birds and tell them that they're all birds, and then you show them a 6th bird that they've never seen before, they will be able to tell you that that's a bird, okay? Because they've got a script in their head that says it's got feathers, it's got wings, it's got beak, it must be a bird. And we are able to do that in a way that animals aren't. And that's incredibly useful, but as with all these things, it can be a problem. So you may have certain scripts in your head, certain self-limiting narratives that you use. For example, I'm no good at maths, I'm not a morning person, I'm this, I'm that. And you've made that connection in your mind. You know, I'm going to go into this situation. You start time traveling. You start saying the outcome will be negative. And the risk there is that you get dragged into that negative space. Now, what people do, and this is where the mistake comes, is they try and avoid that. And it's something called experiential avoidance, okay? We don't like feeling bad. So what we do some of the time is we try and avoid that thing. Again, it's like the ostrich effect that I talked about before. We stick our head in the sand. We think that if I'm worried or if I'm angry, that's a negative thing that I shouldn't be feeling. And therefore we worry about the fact we're worried. We get angry about the fact we're angry. And it becomes a self-perpetuating problem. So acceptance and commitment therapy is saying, right, if all those thoughts and feelings exist, and if there's not necessarily anything I can do about them right now, then I'm going to, first and foremost, I'm going to accept them. So I'm going to notice they're there. I'm going to accept them for what they are. And instead, I'm going to do something that adheres and contributes to my personal values. Okay? I will give you a couple of ideas around this very quickly. So first one is this idea, which I've put together, this high-tech thing, which I think comes up mirrored. So it doesn't quite work, but hey, we'll give it a go. So the way of describing this, you will have values, things that really matter to you, actions that really matter to you. And then you will have a whole ton of unhelpful thoughts, moods, feelings, thoughts, feelings, all the rest of it that's going on in your head. Acceptance and commitment therapy isn't about getting rid of those unhelpful thoughts and pretending they're not there or eradicating them or changing them. It's saying they're still there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring values to the front. Okay? So the thoughts and the feelings are still there in the background, but the thing I'm actually going to do and commit to is something that adheres to my value. Does that make some sense? Another metaphor that's really classic in this area is passengers on a bus. So you imagine you're the driver of a bus in your brain, and the passengers that are on board are the thoughts, the feelings, the moods, the urges. Yeah? So you set off in a direction and you decide this is what I want to do. And immediately the passengers start to pipe up. You know, some will be very supportive. Yeah, you're a great driver. You're going in the right direction. Others will be less so. Are you sure you've thought this through? You know, are you sure this is going to go well? You should be stopping, let us off, all the rest of it. And some will be downright unhelpful. So some will be saying, you are not good at driving. You're a terrible person, whatever it may be. Okay? Now, what you're doing with this approach is you're not jettisoning them, taking them off the bus. You're not getting rid of them. But you're saying, I noticed that they're on the bus, using something like mindfulness to bring you into that present moment. I'm going to accept they're there, but I'm going to remember that I am driving the bus. Okay? I am driving the bus. My thoughts and feelings are useful, but they do not control me. And I mean, for me personally, I don't know about anyone else, but for me, I know that sounds simple, but it had a really, really profound impact on my life. I found it quite difficult with the cognitive behavioral therapy. I know that helps some people, and to catch negative thoughts and to change them and all the rest of it, but I found that quite difficult. What was more useful for me was to say, I'm going to notice when those thoughts and feelings are there, but I'm going to take the weight out of them. I'm going to label them for what they are. You know, that's anger. I'm not angry, but that is anger. And I am going to accept them for what they are, and I'm going to make value-based decisions instead. And there's loads around that. You'd need to think about what your values are, what your actions are that support your values. And like I say, I've probably not done a whole therapeutic technique justice in 3 minutes, but if you want to find out more about acceptance and commitment therapy, there's loads of great stuff out there. Russ Harris, the YouTube guy, Russ Harris talks a load about acceptance and commitment therapy. There's some incredibly useful stuff on that topic, but that's one that you might want to think about. And then the last bit, because I've basically run out of time, as I always do. I'm always too optimistic with my shotgun approach. Is this idea of habits? Okay, so I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour, 2 minutes on habits. I'm going to share these slides with you. Toxic positivity links very much into this. I wanted to share this with you. I'll share this with you afterwards. But we are not, like I say, we're not just getting to the point, and this links into acceptance and commitment therapy, where everything's positive all the time. Actually, there will be some negatives, but it's what you do with that, and it's how you manage those emotions that really matters, I think. And then the last thing is how to make it stick. Put simply, you need to go on the website, jamesclear.com. He's amazing. He talks loads about habits. He's written a book called Atomic Habits. It's brilliant around habits, and he talks about loads of different things. There's a couple that really stand out to me. The first is creating habits based on identity. So, for example, when people set themselves a goal or a challenge or a habit that they want to do, they generally start with an outcome in mind. So, I want to lose weight. I want to lose 3 stone. I want to get into that new dress or those new jeans or whatever it may be. The problem with outcome-based goals is, number one, we set our sights too high. So I want to lose 3 stone, but then you don't lose it immediately, so you give up. Or maybe you do lose the weight, and then you go, now what? Now what the heck do I do? And maybe you revert back. So instead, start with your identity. Decide who you want to be as a person and prove it with small wins. Move from I can't to I don't, okay? That's an identity-based thing. So let me tell you about a couple of these. So, for example, here's an insight for you, groundbreaking idea. If you define yourself as a cyclist, define yourself as a runner, and you prove that to yourself with small wins, you do it regularly, and you define yourself as someone who eats healthily, and you prove that to yourself with small wins by actually doing those things, you will lose weight. The outcome will look after itself. You don't need to worry about the outcome. You're doing the exercise, you're eating the right things, so the outcome looks after itself. And move from I can't to I don't is an interesting one. About 3 years ago, gave up caffeine, okay? Because I felt like it was having an adverse effect on my energy levels and all the rest of it. And the way that I finally got it to stick was by stopping saying, I can't drink that cup of tea, don't offer me that, or whatever it may be. I moved to I don't drink caffeine. I started talking about it like it was part of my identity. In the same way that a vegetarian wouldn't say, oh, I can't eat that steak today. They would say, I don't eat meat. Yeah? So you build an identity around it, and the outcomes look after themselves. And then finally, because again, I've run out of time, if you really want to do it, make your cues as obvious as you can, make your behaviors as easy as you can, and make your rewards satisfying. So you need environmental cues. So if you want to do Pomodoro Technique, you need like a reminder in your phone. You need something that reminds you to do it. If you want to avoid emails or social media, you need to switch those things off so the notifications aren't obvious. So you need to think about the cue or the trigger. If you want to start a new habit, break it down to its constituent parts and make it so easy to start that you can't not start. If you want to start exercising, don't sign up for a marathon tomorrow. Do a minute a day. And I know it sounds ridiculously small, but you'll probably end up doing more, but start so small that you can't not start. And then give yourself some immediate reward for some of these things. So you do something well, you do something that adheres to your values or boosts your well-being, and reward yourself for it. Give yourself a pat on the back, because that solidifies it in our minds. So tons of stuff, jamesclear.com. Go on, buy the book Atomic Habits. I don't get any commission for that, but it's amazing. I really like it. I'm not going to talk about that. I wanted to just finish off with this. I'm going to share the slides with you. If you're interested, we've also launched a mobile app as well. So the mobile app has got loads of info on there. It's got my face talking about some things that, some of which you will have heard today, other things in slightly different subjects. It's got some practical worksheets. It's got some questionnaires on there that you can try out and you can try for yourself as well to kind of measure your levels of well-being. In addition, it's got a feed on there, so you can contact one another through that. I'll set it up so that you're all a part of one cohort on there, so you can all contact one another through there if you want to chat or ask me some questions. And then finally, it's got a habit tracker on there. I mean, if you already use a habit tracker, that's fine. You can use that one rather than this. But again, we find that habits drive a huge amount of behavior. So even committing, as a result of a session like today, there's 1 or 2 things I'm going to do differently. Stick them on the habit tracker. Give yourself the notifications. and stick to those things long term. I will share the slides and I will share the links to the app, which is available on Android and Apple Store, and the course code and all the rest of it. I'll share it all after the session with you today. Hope some of it helps. Sorry I ran over. I always do. Sorry, Cash. I hope you found it interesting. More than that, I hope you found it useful. That was a shotgun approach, wasn't it? There was tons of stuff in there. I hope so. Even one bit of it resonated. I'd be delighted by that. Happy to stick around if you've got any questions, but otherwise, enjoy the rest of your session. Enjoy your day. Thanks very much.